stepsister is marrying my fiancé to claim my fortune. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I stood in the corner, sipping cheap champagne, watching my stepsister flaunt a 2-carat diamond that my stolen inheritance paid for. Bella threw her head back, laughing at something Julian whispered in her ear. The chandelier light caught the ring perfectly. It was blinding, ostentatious, and entirely funded by me. The lavish downtown ballroom they rented for this intimate engagement dinner cost a cool $50,000. I knew that exact number because I had seen the venue's invoice. I also knew that the money came directly from a limited liability company account that held the bulk of my life savings, siphoned out before I even realized I was being played. Helen, my stepmother, drifted through the crowd of high society wannabes, practically glowing with pride. She caught my eye and offered a tight, pitying smile before turning to a guest. "Aren't they just the most stunning couple?" she gushed. "True love always finds a way. It's messy, but you can't fight fate." I took another sip of my terrible drink, swallowing the bile in my throat. If fate meant plotting for 6 months to systematically drain a quiet girl's inheritance, then sure, Julian and Bella were the Romeo and Juliet of modern fraud. I smoothed down my simple black dress. My heart was pounding, but not from the agonizing heartbreak that had paralyzed me a month ago. That pain had burned out entirely, replaced by a cold, calculated, and razor-sharp clarity. They honestly thought I was here to surrender. Bella had invited me out of sheer, unadulterated cruelty, hoping I'd break down crying in front of their wealthy friends and sign away the last of my dignity just to make the nightmare stop. Julian thought I was too weak, too sweet, and too financially illiterate to ever fight back against his brilliant corporate maneuvers. Pattern interrupt, BJ wedding timeline. Folder created, October 14th. Status, executed. They had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath their designer shoes was a hollow shell, ready to cave in. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect, victimless heist, taking my fiancé and my fortune in one swift, devastating move. But they didn't know I knew about the dark, terrifying, multi-million-dollar secret Julian was frantically hiding behind his perfectly tailored suits and charismatic, million-dollar smile. Tonight wasn't going to be a celebration of their love. I gripped the folder in my purse, ready to watch their perfect world completely burn. To understand how we got to this glittering, toxic room, you need to know about the money. I'm Grace. I'm 29, and I live a very quiet life. I restore old furniture, drive a reliable sedan, and wear jeans from Target. But beneath that boring exterior, I was quietly sitting on a massive inheritance. When my biological mother passed away when I was a teenager, she left a trust fund that matured on my 25th birthday. It was a staggering amount of money, carefully invested and largely untouched by me. My father remarried Helen when I was 12, bringing her daughter Bella into my home. Bella was a year younger than me, but from day one, she operated under the delusion that we were in a bitter competition. While I saved my allowance, Bella demanded designer clothes. When my father couldn't afford a sports car for her sweet 16, Helen blamed me, whispering that my mother's money should be shared fairly among the family. They hated that I had a safety net they couldn't touch. Bella grew up obsessed with luxury, status, and taking whatever was mine. If I had a favorite sweater, it went missing. If I liked a boy in high school, she made sure to date him. So, when I met Julian 3 years ago, I kept my wealth entirely hidden. Julian was 31, charismatic, successful, and fiercely protective. He worked in finance, constantly talking about his big deals and acquisitions. For the first 2 years of our relationship, he thought I was just a humble artisan scraping by. When we got engaged, I finally sat him down and showed him the trust fund documents. I will never forget the look in his eyes, a flash of absolute hunger that he quickly masked with a warm, loving smile. "Grace, this is incredible," he had whispered, pulling me into a tight embrace. "You never have to worry about anything ever again. I'm a financial expert, baby. I'm going to protect you and this money from anyone who might want to take advantage of your kind heart." I believed him implicitly, thinking I had finally found my ultimate protector against my greedy stepfamily. I never suspected he was the one I needed protection from the most. About 6 months after our engagement, Julian started planting the seeds of his grand financial scheme. He came home one evening, loosening his silk tie with an exhausted sigh, and poured 2 glasses of wine. He sat me down at my cozy, paint-stained kitchen table and pulled out a sleek, leather-bound portfolio. Inside were glossy brochures for a massive commercial real estate development in the city's booming arts district. "Grace, I have the opportunity of a lifetime," he told me, his eyes shining with infectious excitement. "My firm is getting in on the ground floor of this development. It's guaranteed to triple in value within 3 years. But the buy-in is incredibly steep, and all my liquid assets are tied up in overseas tech portfolios right now." He carefully took my hand, his thumb stroking my engagement ring. "If we pool our resources and form a joint limited liability company, we can buy the anchor property. It'll be the foundation of our future together, our legacy. I want to build an empire for us." Pattern interrupt. Document 4A. Operating agreement. Ownership structure. Julian 80%, Grace 20%. Managing member, Julian. I hesitated. My mother's trust had been safely managed by a conservative bank for a decade. But Julian was brilliant, and more importantly, he was going to be my husband. Whenever I expressed doubt, he would look hurt, asking if I didn't trust him to lead our family. He manipulated my insecurities perfectly, reminding me how my stepmother Helen and Bella always called me timid and afraid of life. He convinced me that this bold move would prove them wrong. Eventually, I caved. We went to a fancy downtown law firm, his friends, of course, and I signed a mountain of dense, complex paperwork. I authorized the wire transfer of nearly 80% of my liquid inheritance into the newly formed J&G Holdings LLC. Julian assured me it was merely a formality that he was listed as the sole managing director, claiming it would make the rapid real estate transactions much smoother. I thought I was securing our romantic future and building a beautiful, shared life. I didn't realize I had just willingly handed over the keys to my entire kingdom. The brutal end of my relationship didn't happen with a dramatic fight or a tearful confession. It happened on a random Tuesday, exactly 3 weeks after the massive wire transfer had officially cleared the bank. I was in my studio, happily sanding a vintage oak dresser, when Julian walked in. He didn't take off his coat. He just stood in the doorway, looking at me with an expression of cold, detached boredom that sent a terrifying shiver straight down my spine. "I can't do this anymore, Grace," he said flatly, his voice devoid of any warmth or affection. "We are just too different. You want to play with sawdust in a garage, and I want a life that actually means something. The wedding is off. I'll have movers get my things tomorrow." I was completely paralyzed. I begged. I cried. I asked if there was someone else. He just shook his head, looking almost annoyed by my tears, and walked out the door. My entire world collapsed in a matter of seconds. I spent 3 days curled on my living room floor, unable to eat, sleep, or comprehend how the man who had promised to protect my legacy had just thrown me away like actual garbage. Then came the fatal, agonizing blow. On Friday morning, my phone started buzzing relentlessly with notifications. I finally opened Instagram with trembling hands. Pattern interrupt. Bella's Instagram post. A photo of her and Julian kissing on a yacht. Caption: "Sometimes, the universe just knows." #soulmates #upgrade. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. He wasn't just gone. He was with my stepsister. The girl who had spent her entire life trying to take my toys, my clothes, and my friends had finally taken the ultimate prize. And the worst part? My brain slowly connected the horrifying dots. The LLC, the rushed paperwork, the massive, irreversible wire transfer of my mother's money. I logged into the bank portal, my hands shaking violently as I typed in my secure password. The screen loaded, confirming my absolute worst, most terrifying nightmare. The LLC bank account balance was showing 0, and my access to the funds had been permanently revoked. My own fiancé and my stepsister had conspired to leave me completely ruined and utterly alone. The absolute betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Hoping for even a shred of familial support, I drove straight to my father's house, tears still streaming down my face. I stormed into the living room, demanding answers. Instead of comfort, I was met with Helen, who was calmly sipping herbal tea on the expensive white sofa. She didn't even have the decency to look guilty. "Grace, calm down and stop being so dramatic," Helen sighed, waving her hand dismissively. Bella didn't steal anyone. Julian realized he made a mistake. You can't help who you love, darling. You two were never a good match anyway. You're far too plain for a man with his ambitions, and Bella is a natural star. You should be happy for your sister. I felt physically sick. He took my money, Helen, the trust fund. We put it into an LLC, and now I'm locked out. Helen's eyes flashed with a cruel, triumphant gleam. Julian mentioned you made a very poor business investment. That's what happens when amateurs play with high finance. Grace, don't go blaming my daughter for your terrible financial decisions. Over the next few weeks, I was systematically exiled from my own family. I wasn't invited to the Sunday dinners. I saw social media posts of Helen, Bella, and Julian dining at five-star restaurants, clinking champagne glasses. I hired a cheap, initial consultation lawyer who looked at the J&G Holdings LLC operating agreement and grimaced. Because Julian was the sole managing member and I had signed the documents willingly, freezing the assets or demanding an immediate payout would require a massive, expensive lawsuit. A lawsuit I could no longer afford because Julian had drained 90% of my liquid cash. I was trapped in a nightmare. I sat in my empty, quiet house, staring at the walls, mourning the life I thought I was going to have. Bella had finally won. She had the handsome, successful man, and she had my mother's fortune to fund her extravagant, deeply desired lifestyle. I felt completely broken, utterly defeated, and hopelessly lost in the dark. Then, I remembered the old, battered laptop Julian had accidentally left hidden in my basement storage. Julian was incredibly meticulous about his appearance, his suits, and his cars, but he was shockingly lazy about his digital footprint. When we first moved in together, his old MacBook Pro had a broken screen hinge, so he tossed it into a plastic storage bin in my basement and bought a new one. In his rush to abandon me and move his expensive clothes out, he completely forgot about that broken machine gathering dust. I sprinted down the basement stairs, tearing through boxes until my hands found the cold aluminum chassis. I brought it upstairs, plugged it in, and prayed. The screen flickered to life. Because he had never logged out of his Apple ID on this device, it was still connected to his primary iCloud account. It began auto-syncing, downloading thousands of new files, messages, and documents from the past year. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the progress bar slowly fill. When it finally finished, I opened his cloud drive. My eyes immediately locked onto a brightly color-coded folder sitting right on the desktop. Pattern interrupt. Folder name, BJ Wedding Timeline. Date created, August 12th. For full months before he broke off our engagement. My breath caught in my throat. I double-clicked the folder. Inside were PDFs of luxury venue brochures, caterer quotes, and a wildly expensive bridal gown receipt. They hadn't just fallen in love spontaneously after our breakup. This was a calculated, premeditated, incredibly cold-blooded heist. Bella and Julian had been secretly planning their extravagant dream wedding while he was still sharing my bed and slowly convincing me to hand over my mother's trust fund. A hot, searing wave of pure rage washed over me, burning away the last shreds of my sorrow. I wasn't sad anymore. I was furious. I started frantically clicking through every folder, determined to find out exactly where my money was parked. I expected to find offshore accounts. Instead, I found a hidden, password-protected folder labeled Liabilities. What I found inside that folder changed the entire trajectory of my revenge completely. I spent the next 48 hours glued to that glowing screen, barely stopping to eat or sleep. I opened the synced iMessage app and scrolled back through months of conversations between Julian and a contact saved simply as B. The texts were sickening, reading like two villains plotting in a movie. She's totally buying the real estate pitch, Julian wrote on October 5th. Just need her to sign the final LLC docs next week. Then we are golden, babe. Bella's reply made my stomach violently churn. Hurry up. I am so sick of pretending to be nice to her. I want that house in the Hamptons, Jules. They were laughing at me. They thought I was a pathetic, gullible idiot. But as I kept digging into the hidden liabilities folder, the arrogant narrative they had built began to fracture. I found a series of heavily encrypted banking PDFs. Guessing wildly, I typed his mother's maiden name, then his birthday. Nothing. On a hunch, I typed his favorite watch brand, Patek 123. The files instantly decrypted and burst open on my screen. They weren't investment portfolios or deeds to luxury properties. They were incredibly aggressive final demand letters, overdue balance statements, and threatening legal notices. Pattern interrupt, notice of default. Apex Capital Lending. Outstanding balance, $2,450,000. Immediate payment required to avoid asset seizure. I blinked rapidly, convinced I was reading the documents wrong. I opened another file, then a third. There were massive, unsecured loans from shady, high-interest private lenders. Maxed out corporate credit cards. Julian wasn't a successful financial genius building an empire. He was a degenerate fraud masquerading as a Wall Street hotshot, playing with dangerous money. He hadn't stolen my inheritance to live a glamorous life with my stepsister. He stole it to artificially plug the gaping holes in his sinking ship, desperately trying to buy himself a little more time before his inevitable, crushing ruin. My brilliant, untouchable ex-fiancé was actually drowning in $3 million of catastrophic debt. The sheer magnitude of Julian's financial disaster was absolutely breathtaking. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen as the terrifying reality of the situation fully clicked into place. I opened a subfolder labeled Collateral and found the exact operating agreement for J&G Holdings LLC, the company holding my stolen inheritance. Julian had illegally pledged the entire LLC, including all of my cash assets, as primary collateral to secure an extension on his massive private loans. If he didn't pay back the predatory lenders within 6 months, they would seize the LLC and drain my money completely. He was basically using my life savings as a temporary human shield against very angry, very dangerous creditors. But then, a completely different realization hit me. Hitting me so hard, I actually laughed out loud in my empty kitchen. I went back to the text messages between Julian and Bella. I searched for the words debt, loans, and Apex Capital. 0 results. I searched Bella's frantic texts planning their $500,000 dream wedding and luxury honeymoons in the Maldives. Pattern interrupt. Bella's text, November 2nd. Can we up the floral budget by $20K? Mommy says peonies are an absolute must for a high society bride. Bella had absolutely no clue. My greedy, status-obsessed stepsister thought she had just successfully stolen a multi-millionaire fiancé and a massive, endless fortune. She thought she was marrying into limitless luxury and elevating herself above me forever. In reality, she was willingly shackling herself to a sinking cinder block. When they signed that marriage certificate, their finances would legally merge under our state's laws. If I sued Julian right now, the lawsuit would become public. The creditors would instantly panic and seize the LLC funds before a judge could even grant my injunction. I would lose absolutely everything. I couldn't just attack him directly. I had to be much smarter, much colder, and completely invisible. I needed a brilliant legal shark to help me build the ultimate financial bear trap. The very next morning, I walked into the sterile, modern office of Vance & Associates. Lawyer Vance was in his late 50s, possessed eyes like a hawk, and charged $800 an hour. He was a forensic accounting expert who specialized in dismantling corporate fraud. I sat down, placed the battered laptop on his desk, and explained the entire twisted saga. Vance spent 3 hours meticulously reviewing the encrypted PDFs, the LLC agreement, and the sickening texts. When he finally leaned back in his leather chair, he steepled his fingers, a faint, predatory smile playing on his lips. "Your ex-fiancé is incredibly arrogant, Grace," Vance said, his voice a low rumble. "But he is also remarkably sloppy. He used boilerplate documents to form the LLC, and he fundamentally misunderstood how asset protection works when fraud is actively involved." He turned his monitor. "Here is our dilemma. If we aggressively demand your money back today, Julian files for bankruptcy. Your stolen funds get hopelessly tied up in federal court for a decade, fighting angry creditors for scraps, leaving him with his massive, catastrophic debts. Pattern interrupt. Legal strategy. Objective. Isolate Grace's capital. Mechanism. Ex parte injunction citing fraudulent inducement. Timing. Postnuptial. However, Vance continued, his eyes gleaming. If we remain completely silent and let this wedding happen, the game changes. The moment Julian and Bella say "I do," she becomes legally tethered to his sinking ship. Furthermore, We can quietly file an emergency ex parte injunction to freeze the LLC assets under seal, proving you were fraudulently induced. We isolate your money, leaving him with his debts. I sat there, processing the enormous moral weight of his plan. I could warn Bella. I could save my toxic stepsister from destroying her life and future. Instead, I decided to let her proudly walk straight into her own total financial execution. To execute this ruthless plan, Vance needed bulletproof evidence that the initial transfer of my inheritance was legally invalid. We spent days reviewing the original J&G Holdings LLC formation documents line by line. Suddenly, Vance let out a sharp, triumphant laugh that echoed loudly in the conference room. "Look at this, Grace," he said, pointing his gold pen at the final signature page of the operating agreement. Julian was in such a frantic rush to secure the funds to appease his creditors that he completely bypassed a critical legal requirement. I leaned in closely. There was my signature and Julian's signature. But the section for the mandatory state notary public was stamped, yet entirely unsigned and undated by the actual notary officer. Pattern interrupt. State Statute 4A-201. LLC asset transfers exceeding $500,000 requiring partner pooling must bear a fully executed notary signature to be legally binding. It's a fatal defect, Vance explained, his eyes dancing with excitement. Because this document was improperly executed, the entire transfer of your trust fund can be classified as an unauthorized, fraudulent conversion of assets. The LLC doesn't legally own your money. It's merely holding stolen property. We moved with terrifying speed and secrecy. Vance drafted complex legal briefs. We went before a sympathetic judge in a closed-door, ex parte hearing, meaning Julian was not notified. Vance presented the texts proving premeditated fraud, the documents showing Julian's hidden debts, and the flawed LLC agreement. The judge was appalled by Julian's criminality. He immediately signed a sweeping, sealed injunction. My funds within the LLC were completely frozen and legally fenced off. Julian could still log into the bank portal and see the large numbers, maintaining his illusion of wealth. But if he tried to withdraw a single cent, it would bounce. The incredibly dangerous trap was fully set, primed, and just waiting for them to step inside. 2 weeks after the judge secretly froze the accounts, a heavy, cream-colored envelope arrived at my modest house. It was a formal invitation to Julian and Bella's extravagant engagement dinner at the most exclusive, expensive venue in the city. Included was a handwritten, deeply condescending note from Bella. "Grace, we really want you there. It's time to be adults and move on. Please don't cause drama." I immediately called Lawyer Vance. "They are definitely setting me up," I told him. "Julian is bleeding cash. His creditors are circling, and he knows I haven't sued him yet. He's going to use this public party to ambush me." "Exactly," Vance agreed. "He's going to try to force you to sign a waiver in front of witnesses to legitimize his theft before the wedding. Play the part, Grace. Be the heartbroken, defeated ex. Give him exactly what he wants." I spent hours perfecting my look for the evening. I chose a plain black dress, minimal makeup, and styled my hair to look slightly unkempt. I wanted to look completely exhausted, broken, and desperate for peace. When I arrived at the glittering ballroom, the sheer opulence made me sick. There were towering floral arrangements, ice sculptures, and a string quartet. Pattern interrupt. Estimated cost of engagement dinner, $55,000. Current accessible balance in Julian's secret personal checking account, $412.00. Bella spotted me. She glided across the room in a custom designer gown, her stolen 2-carat diamond catching the light. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "I am so glad you showed up to surrender, Grace," she hissed, dropping her innocent act entirely. "Julian has some paperwork for you. Sign it, and maybe my mother will speak to you again." I looked down, forcing tears to well up in my eyes, playing my pathetic role perfectly. I nodded weakly, following her straight toward the architect of my carefully planned, imminent revenge. Julian was waiting in a secluded VIP alcove off the main ballroom floor, holding 2 glasses of expensive champagne. He looked perfectly styled, but up close, I could see the frantic, dark circles under his eyes. The immense pressure of his secret debt was finally cracking his flawless facade. "Grace, Thank you for coming, he said smoothly. Look, I know things ended badly, but I want to do the right thing. I had my lawyers draft a clean break settlement. He slid a legal document across the table. I glanced at the header. It was a full release of all my claims against J&G Holdings LLC in exchange for a pathetic lump sum of $50,000. It was barely 5% of my stolen inheritance. Sign this, Julian urged, his voice dropping into that familiar, persuasive tone. It saves us a messy, public legal battle. You get cash in hand tomorrow to rebuild your life, and Bella and I can start our marriage with a clean slate. Pattern interrupt. The pen he offered me was a Mont Blanc. Retail value, $900. Bought on a maxed-out credit card, currently 90 days past due. I slowly picked up the expensive pen. I let a single, perfectly timed tear roll down my cheek. You really loved her the whole time, didn't you? I whispered, my voice cracking with fake agony. He gave a patronizing sigh. I'm sorry, Grace. But yes, just sign the paper, and you can go home and be free of this. I leaned over the table, pressing the pen to the signature line. But I didn't write my name. I carefully drew a large, smiling cartoon face across the page. Then, I reached into my clutch and pulled out the thick, sealed manila envelope Lawyer Vance had prepared. I shoved it directly into his chest, completely dropping my tearful, broken facade. Julian looked down at the envelope in confusion. The fake tears were gone, replaced by a cold smile. Without saying a word, I turned and walked purposefully out of the alcove, marching directly toward the center of the lavish ballroom. I grabbed a spoon from a catering tray and clinked it sharply against a champagne flute. The high-pitched ringing sliced through the chatter, and the room of 50 wealthy guests fell completely silent. Excuse me, everyone. I'd like to propose a special toast to the happy couple, I announced loudly. Bella glared at me from across the room, panic flashing in her eyes, while Helen started rushing toward me to shut me down. I know you all think I am here to gracefully surrender, I continued, but I actually brought a wedding gift. I gestured to the AV technician at the back, a kid I had tipped $500 an hour prior. He hit a button. The two massive projector screens, which had been displaying romantic slideshows, suddenly flashed black. Pattern interrupt. Screen display 1. Text message from Julian. She signed the LLC docs. The money is ours. See you at the hotel, babe. Gasps erupted from the crowd as the premeditated cheating was broadcast in 10-foot letters. Bella's jaw dropped in horror as her social image shattered. But I wasn't finished. I raised my hand, and the tech clicked to the next slide. The screens filled with Julian's terrifying financial reality. Apex Capital default notices. Maxed out offshore credit cards. The glaring, red balance of negative $3 million. Julian didn't leave me because he fell in love with my stepsister, I declared, staring directly into Bella's pale face. He left me because he is a broke fraudster drowning in debt, and he needed a gullible partner to legally share his financial liabilities. The entire ballroom erupted into absolute, unmitigated chaos as the brutal reality finally set in. The silence of the ballroom was shattered by a cacophony of shouting, crying, and dropping glassware. Helen, my composed stepmother, let out a piercing shriek and grabbed Julian, demanding to know if the giant numbers on the screens were real. Julian stood frozen, his face drained of blood, staring at the financial documents he thought were safely hidden in his encrypted cloud drive. Bella was hyperventilating. She grabbed Julian by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo, shaking him violently. Tell them it's a lie, she screamed, her hair falling into her face. Tell them you have the money. Tell them you have Grace's trust fund. Julian finally found his voice, a pathetic, trembling whisper. I do. The LLC, it's safe. Actually, Julian, it's not. I interrupted, my voice perfectly calm. If you open that envelope I just gave you, you'll find a court-ordered ex parte injunction. I legally froze the entire LLC yesterday afternoon due to fraudulent inducement. You can't touch a single penny of my money. And worse, I anonymously forwarded your location to the Apex Capital Collection team. Pattern interrupt. Venue doors open loudly. Two large, intimidating men in cheap suits walk into the ballroom, holding thick legal folders and looking directly at Julian. The timing was cinematic. The private creditors had arrived to publicly serve him. Bella stumbled backward, looking from the furious creditors to Julian's terrified face. In that devastating moment, the reality crashed down on her. She hadn't stolen a billionaire. She had stolen a massive anchor, and they were already legally bound by the joint venue contracts they opened. I didn't stay to watch the screaming match escalate. I placed my champagne glass on a tray, smoothed down my black dress, and walked out the front door. I stepped out into the cool night air, finally able to breathe for the first time. It has been 8 months since that explosive night, and the fallout has been spectacularly brutal to witness. Lawyer Vance systematically dismantled J&G Holdings LLC in court. Because we proved Julian committed fraud by bypassing the notary and lying about his finances, the judge dissolved the company and returned 100% of my mother's trust fund directly back to my secure, private accounts. Julian wasn't just broke, he was entirely destroyed. His financial firm fired him the next morning. The private creditors seized his luxury car, his watch collection, and pushed him into forced bankruptcy. Last I heard, he was living in a cramped studio apartment, facing multiple federal wire fraud charges for lying on corporate loan applications. As for Bella, the karma was absolute perfection. Because she had aggressively co-signed on the extravagant engagement party venue, the non-refundable honeymoon packages, and several joint credit cards during their brief engagement, she was held legally liable for the immediate wedding debts. Helen tried to bail her out, but Julian's mess dragged them down. Bella had to sell her designer bags and is currently working a miserable retail job to pay legal fees. She stole my fiancé and inherited a massive financial nightmare. Pattern interrupt. Current status: Grace's trust fund, fully restored. Julian's net worth, minus $3. 2 million. Bella's status: drowning in high-interest debt. I went back to my quiet, peaceful life. I still restore old furniture, wear jeans from Target, and drive my reliable sedan. But I am fundamentally changed. I learned that money can attract predators who wear beautiful masks, and that true power isn't about flashing wealth. It's about knowing exactly how to legally protect yourself. I trusted the wrong man, but I survived. The greatest revenge in the world wasn't ruining them. It was simply letting them ruin themselves.